Hi, welcome back to the Political Pulse. I'm Michael Harby, and I'm here with my co-host Gus Meadows. We're lucky to have local member for Hillary's and former Scotch teacher, Caitlin Collins MLA. We hope you enjoy our chat.
All right. Well, Caitlin Collins, welcome back to Scotch and also on the Political Pulse. What was your life like before politics, and what experiences have shaped who you are today?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. It is great to be back at Scotch. I loved teaching here, and so it's brought back a lot of fond memories today being back here. But on that note, I will say that teaching was one of the biggest influences that I've had on my life and that has shaped who I am today. But going back a little bit further, I would say my story as a migrant family coming out to Australia. So many families share this story in Western Australia. I represent, Hillary's electorate in the northern suburbs. It seems like every second house that I knock on, someone either has a Scottish accent or an Irish accent, an English accent. So it is a really common migrant story. But for us, my dad moved out here as part of his job in the oil and gas industry, and it created a whole new set of opportunities that I don't think would have otherwise been available to me and my family. I was only 3 when we moved out, and I realised looking back, I held a really privileged lifestyle here on the coast in sunny WA. We'd often sit round the table, my mum, my dad, my brother and I, and talk about my family's upbringing and how different it was to the experience that my brother and I had. Mum grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and so I think from a really young age, I realised just how much politics has an influence on shaping who you are, on your safety, on your future. And so my upbringing, having listened to my parents' experiences, made me realise just how much politics matters. My dad, through his oil and gas job, would tell us about what it was like to work in other countries with different types of political systems and the impact those systems would have on their people. And so I was really keen to experience life outside of Perth. And so that leads me to my next, I guess, great influence, which is teaching. I chose in my 20s, after my degree of history and politics, to go and teach English as a second language all over the world. I taught in Vietnam, in Colombia, in India, and I taught people of all ages, all backgrounds. Like, it was as diverse as a job as you could get. I was teaching in 1 year, CEOs, high-powered CEOs, business English in Bogota, and then in another year teaching nursery rhymes to 4-year-olds in the slums of India. And so these experiences really did shape my way of thinking. My parents had, as I said before, taught me a lot about the values of understanding the impacts of social and financial inequality in the world, but now I was experiencing it and seeing it firsthand myself. It really made me realise the power of education, and, that education is really the only thing that can expand opportunities for people. And so those sort of formative teaching years really, really did shape sort of the values that I held. And then when I got back to Perth from teaching abroad, I went on to teach history and politics at a number of different schools, including Scotch. And I realised just how important a role that was. And, I was always telling my students different ways that they could get involved and be politically engaged. And I realised that I could take some of my own medicine. And one way of doing that was to actually put my name forward as a candidate.
That's like 10 lifetimes in one right there.
It sounds
Easy.
crazier than it probably was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was in my 20s, always travelling, working in hospitality to save up for the next destination and then live and teach there. And the fortunate thing about teaching English as a second language was it was a ticket into every country. So, yeah, I feel very lucky to have had those experiences and have them shape who I am now.
Yeah, I mean, teaching when it comes to politics, is there any like kind of specific examples that you took from that into politics today, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. Like teaching is all about, it's a practical job and it's all about listening. And I've discovered, politicians often cop heat for not listening and for just talking like I'm doing right now. But the reality is it's about listening to the people that you represent, in the case of teaching to your students and what their needs are, what their issues might be. You can only help solve something by understanding what the problem is. And so I really genuinely feel like teaching did prepare me for this role. We're so used to seeing, if we only go back a few decades, Parliament was a pretty one-dimensional place in terms of who we saw as our representatives. Now we've got, males, females, people of all ages, but people of all backgrounds and careers as well.
Which
We've got
is
teachers.
You've got to represent the entire
Representation
community.
matters. Healthcare workers, we've got a Sparky, we've got, paramedics, everyone and anyone now, and I think that is really important.
Did your students have any influence over you becoming a politician?
They absolutely did. That's a great question, and I wondered if you know the answer or not. But yeah, it was actually a Scotch boy that really convinced me that this was the right thing to do. I had ran back in 2017, which we can get to.
Shortly,
but I wasn't sure about whether I was ready to put my name forward again. It's a tough gig, putting yourself forward. And running a campaign in a marginal seat. And I had a great group of politics and history students here at Scotch that were really positive about me putting my name forward. And so I'll always thank them for that.
I mean, we've got a bit of a two-parter on the next question, but you moved really quickly into the Labour Party. So I guess what kind of drew you there?
Yeah, great question. Look, I have come from a family of Irish and Scottish Labor supporters, but in saying that, it was those formative experiences in my life growing up, listening to my parents' stories, and then my own experiences of teaching abroad that really helped shape the values that I have now and the values that I realised 10 years ago really strongly aligned with those of the Labor Party. As I said, Labor to me is the party that cares about creating opportunities for everyone, giving everyone a fair go, no matter their postcode, no matter their income. And so for me, when I was looking at, what party does that in practice? What party puts forth policies that are pushing for more accessible and affordable public healthcare, public education, decent working conditions. And for me, there was no doubt that those values aligned with the Labor Party.
Has the reality matched your expectations of the Hillary's seat?
Yeah, look, I ran in Hillary's in 2021 and it was at the height of COVID. Mark McGowan was the Premier and was really, really popular. And so I guess I had an unusual experience as a candidate in that you would knock on every door and people would know who the Premier is. It was a level of
figure at the time,
really popular figure. It was a level of engagement in politics that we just hadn't seen before. You'd turn on your TV and you'd see the Premier and the Health Minister in your living room every night on your TV.
Yeah, I guess he provided strength where there was strength nowhere else.
Absolutely. And so I had this, sense of security in running in that campaign. I was, so proud of the party that had helped steer this state through a difficult pandemic. And it was challenging, though. It was still a seat that had been Liberal for 30 years. It was still a seat that people thought, we're not sure we can win that. It's, it's just not a Labor seat. And so I worked to just speak to as many people as I possibly could, to have those conversations on the doors, on the phones, to ask people what they felt, was missing in their area. And, the reality is a lot of people fed back like they had been in an area that had felt somewhat neglected, and that, their local member had perhaps become complacent. And so did the reality meet or expectations meet reality? I would say, the values of the Labor Party were always there. But when you're in government, it does take compromise, and it does take time to implement policies. I think that was a big surprise for me, that, you've got all these grand ideas for your electorate and for your community to make things happen overnight. But part of my job is to work with all of the different agencies and the stakeholders, the community, the government. And it's not easy, there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape that's makes life hard to just solve problems immediately. But I'm really, really proud that I've been able to deliver record funding for my community. And, there's really visible, tangible outcomes there, like new schools and better roads and, funding for local community groups. So I'm really proud of that.
Well, I think that leads nicely into what we're going to talk about next. And you talked on Liberal strongholds, where you contested seats in the seat of Cottesloe against the former Premier Colin Barnett in 2017. Some may have called it unwinnable. What drove you to take that risk, and what did it teach you about resilience, and more importantly, earning the trust of non-traditional Labor seats?
Yeah, really good question. Look, I was approached by someone in 2016 I was living in Cottesloe at the time, to consider putting my name forward to run against the then Premier Colin Barnett, who was also the member for Cottesloe. And, despite studying history and politics, and I'd done a parliamentary internship in Dublin, I'd never considered being a politician. Like, that was just not something even on my radar. But as I said before, I was always telling my students different ways that they can be politically engaged citizens, whether that's, marching in a protest or writing a letter to their local MP and running as a candidate.
All very important things.
Yeah, all very important, equally as important. But putting your name forward as a candidate to run is just one other way of political engagement. And so it really was a baptism of fire into Australian or Western Australian politics. While my values had always aligned with Labor, I'd always voted Labor, I wasn't, someone that had been part of campaigns from a young age. I hadn't been heavily involved in the party. And so I went from really no experience to suddenly running what was a one-woman show, because you've got to remember, when you're running in a really what's considered a non-winnable seat, you're not getting resources from your party or support from many places, to be honest. So it was really me on my own, having real authentic conversations with people who said, this is the first time a politician has knocked on my door. And so I think that is what created that resilience in me, that even though, I was under no illusion that I probably wasn't going to get elected in 2017 in the seat of Cottesloe, I still had incredible conversations with people that wanted to be heard and felt heard after having spoke to me. And, my students and I spoke about some of the key issues in the state at that time around youth mental health, around climate, around, we had this huge mining boom that felt like it was being squandered and just not trickling down. There was seeming to be a sort of growing separation between the haves and the have-nots. And so I had a lot of drive to run this campaign in a non-winnable, Liberal blue ribbon seat. And it taught me a lot about myself, but it gave me, I guess, the confidence that I could see myself in Parliament as a teacher, as a young woman, And that was something that, I didn't realise then that I would be asked less than 4 years later by the new Premier, Mark McGowan, to then run in Hillary's.
Something you touched on there was just about kind of, you weren't in campaigns when you were younger and you weren't so, I guess, there's some people that are like super involved. Is there any almost advice you'd give to students that might not be directly involved in something at the moment but are looking to get into politics later?
Well, my advice, even though I guess I found a pathway without student politics, for example, my advice would be to get involved. If I could turn back the clock during my university years, and it's not about necessarily joining a party or having to align yourself early on, but I think there's something really magical about campaigns, whether it's a single issue, if there's something that you're passionate about getting involved, whether it's joining that march on the steps of Parliament to voice your concerns to the legislators making those decisions, or whether it's, doing a mini campaign of writing letters to put pressure on a particular group or a politician. So my advice to anyone is to be politically engaged. There is nothing more important than that. And, we see that now more than ever in an age of social media where it's easy for different truths to get out there, that I think people need to have an understanding of what it is they're passionate about and what change they want to see, challenge the status quo. And, that's the way to make a difference, is by getting involved.
I don't know, for me as well, I feel like that was something I kind of wanted to go into politics later in life.
Yeah.
So I guess that's really helpful advice almost, because I think the challenge is kind of getting involved.
Yeah.
And I think just anything, getting involved in any way is really helpful.
Yeah. But having that, I like that you've said, or later in life, it might be that you want a career first. And I think going back to what we said about Parliament should be a place that has people from all walks of life and different career backgrounds, that's really important. And I think, often in the past we've seen career politicians, people that have just been in it from day dot. There's nothing wrong with that either.
Do you think it's important that politicians have a wide range of experience before entering Parliament, or is it?
Yeah, but remember, political experience is experience. I sometimes wish, I wish I'd been an electorate officer, or I wish I'd worked in a ministerial office before doing this job. I think it would be really helpful. So I think there's a place for people of all backgrounds and careers, including people with political backgrounds. But I do think it's important to have teachers, to have healthcare workers, lawyers, doctors, and everyone else in between.
Because they can better relate
to
people.
Yeah, people can see themselves in Parliament.
I think that's important. As long everyone getting kind of represented is really important.
Yeah,
whether it's
sure.
a doctor or a teacher. I think that's the strongest part of Parliament, is making sure that everyone's involved.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's good to hear. It's good to hear from the inside that there are those kind of representations.
Yeah, it's changing. We've got Stuart Aubrey, who's a young man representing Scarborough, who's a sparky, was an electrician. Once upon a time, it just would have been unheard of that we had tradies in Parliament. And I think that's what's so special now. And we've also got over 50% women in our Parliament, which is also really important. Only a decade or two ago, it looked like a very, very different place.
And also another additional question, sorry. You're a politics and law teacher, and I think in society we're seeing political interest and engagement decline amongst young people. I think it was 6% or something understood a part or something of politics. Why do you think that is?
That they're disengaging?
Yeah, disengaging.
I think people get sick. They can be overwhelmed now. Social media can be an incredible thing for members of Parliament to get their message out to the community. But people can also be overwhelmed by just how much material is being pushed at them. And so I think young people as well, they see what's happening around the world and they get frustrated by it, and it can sometimes be easy now to literally switch off, whether that's turning your phone off or, working your algorithm so it's not presenting you with politics and instead it's something completely different. So I think, representation matters. If young people don't see themselves in Parliament, that would be a reason to switch off. But we've now got, Charlotte Walker, I think her name is, a young senator who's 21 from South Australia in federal parliament now. Hopefully, I know that she's really big on using TikTok as a platform to reach out to younger voters. Hopefully with more young people in Parliament.
Becomes more relatable.
Yeah, it becomes more relatable. I try to do TikToks, but I'm shocking at it.
I mean, I'm glad you kind of talked about that, like that feeling of getting overwhelmed, because like sometimes I'm sitting in class and it's just like, sometimes it's kind of like scary almost hearing all this stuff going on. But I feel like, because it's bleak, but I feel like that's what makes it so important at the same time. Like, it's why I'm glad we can sit down and have conversations like this, because it's so important that this kind of information and politics and just everything is getting out to the wider community. Because I think now it's so easy to just be so, overwhelmed and a bit worried about the future, that it's just easy to turn off and not worry about it.
Yeah, well, that's why I think the study of history is so important. And for me, I've talked about my experiences teaching English abroad that shaped me, but even just teaching history, going over with students the impact of a particular group in a country taking power, holding power, what that looks like and how that impacts the population. This is what then impacts decisions and the ripple effect around the world. So really, really important that people have a strong understanding of history and that we don't just rewrite it to suit ourselves.
I guess it's often a common misconception of what politicians will do on a day-to-day basis. Like, people see question time, but maybe not the full picture. What would a typical day look like for you as the member of Hillary's?
Question time is just one tiny part of what we do. And, the reality is it can be quite theatrical. If you watch it, it's what you see, the snippets on the news each night of the opposition and the government members going at each other, arguing. The reality is if it's a sitting week, we, the Labor Party, would meet as a caucus to discuss what bills are coming up that week. We'd then read bill briefings. I might prepare a speech to contribute to a second reading debate. But that's Parliament, it's Parliament adds up to about 6 or 7 months of the year when you add it all up. As a backbencher, the biggest part of my job is representing the people of Hillary's. So going out into my community to understand the needs and the issues of various community groups, different, organisations, whether that be schools, sporting clubs, but a lot of the people often see me at lots of different events and it can look a bit glamorous sometime if you're always here and there. 99% of the job is in my office helping individuals who have reached out about sometimes really complex, serious issues. Sometimes reaching out to an MP is the last option for someone after they've tried everything else. The system just seems to be working against them. How trying to navigate agencies can be a struggle for anyone. And so, my office and I see us as the conduit between the people in the community and those state government agencies. And it's not easy. It's, that was always a big surprise to me after I got elected, how long things would take to get answers back. Sometimes these agencies, you want them to be talking to each other because there's more than one agency involved, but they're working in silos. But these are the challenges that, an individual shouldn't be dealing with on their own. And that's where having a strong representative, someone that's willing to go and bat for them, is really, really important.
And we're now going to turn our attention to sort of looking at society and the cost of living crisis, in which involves housing costs and goods and services costs and currently fuel costs as global conflict unfolds. With ongoing pressures like the cost of living, what policies do you think are genuinely making a difference right now, and what needs to be addressed in the future?
Yeah, look, you've hit the nail on the head. Cost of living is absolutely the number one issue that Western Australian families are experiencing, and also, of course, across the rest of the country and parts of the world at the moment. You mentioned the fuel crisis. That's only exacerbating things. We've got an ongoing conflict in the Middle East that's making prices surge. And so it is really important that governments recognise that families are feeling those pressures and how can we deal with that. And sometimes there are smaller things that governments can do to try and ease those pressures by getting money back into the pockets of everyday people. And so whether that's through, student assistance payments to help with school costs, whether that's with energy credits to help with the cost of electricity, a big one that we're really proud of is the $2.80 fare anywhere. So, one major policy, I guess legacy policy of this government has been the expansion of MetroNet, this huge rail network to allow greater connectivity in our suburbs to our CBD. But with that is making sure that it's affordable and accessible to everyone. And so capping it at that one zone cost of $2.80 means that families are genuinely saving hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year. So in the Hillary's electorate, I think it works out to be about $600 to $700. But if you live further north or south in the outer suburbs, you're saving upwards of $3,000 a year from that particular policy. But you also mentioned housing, and there's no doubt that the cost of housing, the pressures of supply or lack of, is a challenge. We're really fortunate to have an incredibly passionate housing minister in this state, John Kerry, who really thinks outside the box when it comes to housing. There's no one single answer to what is a very complex issue. And so we've got a number of policies around, building more social and affordable homes, improving rental rights, stopping rental bidding. We've also got, key start policies, loans for first home buyers, creating more supply to actually help families who are struggling at this time.
Those are long-term solutions, but is there any short-term solutions?
Yeah, so a short-term solution is modular homes, for example. So these are really rapidly built to try and deal with the intense supply issue at this time. There's absolutely, we're seeing major planning reforms take place around, train stations and built-up areas to improve density. So again, these things take time to build, but I think we'll really see some differences in the next few years.
Cost of living.
It's an important part for young people watching this and the wider community.
Yeah, and for young voters as well. So I guess it's always good to hear when you have politicians talk about policies and stuff like that, because I guess as upcoming young voters, it's important to know that kind of issues that will affect us later are being addressed in the current as well. And I guess I'm just kind of going on a tangent here, but it's important that, and I think that's why it's really good that we get to hear about kind of policies that the Labor government has for
what are
us.
the tangible measures that are being implemented to address what is a serious problem. Absolutely.
And that's that's good to hear. It's good to hear that there are solutions.
And looking ahead, what do you aim to achieve at the end of your time in politics, both as a member for Hillary's and within the Labor Party?
Yeah, look, I think I'll be satisfied if I have stayed true to my values and the values of the party that I represent. I'll be proud if I have delivered on all of the commitments that I made at both the 2021 state election and the 2025 state election. I think, having taken over a seat that I felt was neglected for some time and that, had a complacent member that didn't necessarily deliver for the community, it's been really important for me to be visible and to be active. And every day I get good feedback from people who don't even necessarily vote for me, but they, say, we appreciate that you are accessible and that you are engaged with, my kids' school or our local sporting club. And so my legacy is that, whether or not I continue to be voted in as the member, that people remember me as someone that worked really, really hard to represent their needs in the state parliament. I'm also fortunate after the last state election to be appointed as the Parliamentary Secretary for Emergency Services, Corrective Services, Defence Industries, Veterans and Racing and Gaming.
What are those involved?
Yeah, so when you are a Parliamentary Secretary, you're assisting the Minister with their portfolios. So I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Honourable Paul Papalia, who's the Minister for those 5 portfolios. And so I get to sit in on briefings with the various agencies, whether they have a Director General or a Commissioner. We engage with the unions and other stakeholders to make sure that we're creating good policy.
Yeah. And what about in Labor more generally? Where do you hope to end up within that part in the party?
Yeah, well, look, I represent Hillary's, and so I hope that if through my hard work I'll keep getting elected as the member for Hillary's, and that I'll be able to do my party proud through that avenue. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, well, I have nothing left. But is there anything you wanted to ask us, or anything you wanted to talk about more broadly before we finish?
What are the big issues that you think are facing young people today?
I mean, the cost of living.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one.
And I guess that's the broad topic, but then more generally, housing, and then I guess not having to make sacrifices, like having to choose between filling up your car and a grocery shop.
Yeah.
Which is important. I think most people are experiencing some sort of struggle in some way.
Absolutely. And do you have concerns about AI? I know when I taught here, the school was so big on STEM and on teaching people programming and coding. And now, in the last 6 months, it's looking like, well, we don't actually need people with those skills because AI has taken those jobs already. So,
well, I guess
does that scare you?
Employment and opportunities for us in terms of not being taken over by technology.
Robots.
Something that we've always said but never felt it was realistic.
Yeah, it always felt, even
far away.
Yes, for me.
Futuristic.
Yeah.
I guess I hope to be an optimist that we don't lose our working industry to AI and that we use it as a tool. I guess that's what my hope is that we use it as a tool
in an appropriate way.
In an appropriate way to help us.
Absolutely. Help with productivity.
That's what I was.
But the worry is kind of where the line stops between when we start using it as a tool and when it ends as kind of taking over jobs and employment.
Yeah, and that's a challenge that I think about every day as a legislator. How do we deal with that?
I guess how do you incorporate it within different channels of society and how to use it effectively? Do you reckon AI will have any involvement within politics, or does it currently have any involvement?
It doesn't have huge involvement in politics. I think definitely agencies could benefit from using AI platforms to streamline a lot of their activity, but politicians as such aren't using it to help with legislation at this point.
Do you think there might be involvement with AI?
I'm not sure. Yeah, we're the ones that will have to be legislating around what is and isn't appropriate. So, but absolutely, everyone's using it. It's only a matter of time before it's embedded in everything we do.
Yeah.
I guess, what are your views on AI then?
Yeah, I think it's a tool that we should, consider how incredible it has been to enhance our productivity. But we do need to be careful around the impacts that it can have if it does start taking jobs and what that could mean for society. These are really important questions that we need to be thinking about now and not in 15 years' time.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Talk with you.
Really enjoyed that.